I gotta show you guys how tight this really is. So you can see the fiberglass bump stops for the rear clam. I've probably got 5 millimeters to spare on that side. You can see how tight it is between the flywheel, the transmission, probably 10 millimeters to spare there. Check out the engine mount. Just fits, slides down in there onto its post. And then the same thing on this side. That's probably 3 millimeters. But it'll go, steady as she goes. Hi everyone, how are you? My name is Dan Dulac and welcome back to my channel where I am building a V10 Ultima Evolution convertible. If you're new to my channel, you might want to check out any one of the previous 23 episodes. We are up to episode 24 on this super fun build. And on this episode, we're going to go through and work on and weld up some additional pieces of the exhaust headers. We're going to weld on the O2 sensor bung as well as the exhaust temperature sensor bung on both headers, as well as some mating flanges, so I can get those headers off to the powder coater. We're also gonna work on some AN lines and AN fittings. Sometimes building some of these lines can be a little tricky. I'll share with you some of my technique, so if you're ever building some AN lines, it might make your life a little bit easier. But we've got a lot of other stuff to do as well. So without further ado, let's jump right in and get started. All right, we're gonna fabricate some -16 AN lines here. In the last video, you heard me talk about adding a 180 U-bend hose end fitting there, so I've done that. I made up that line, and then how this will route is the line will come out here, do a slight 90, and then plug into the engine, which is gonna be right about there. It was too tight to go directly from the sump to the input on the engine, so had to extend this out and do a nice 90 there. Anyway, what we're gonna do now is we're gonna put together a -16 line that comes out of the oil thermostat here, and then we'll feed up to the inlet on the sump. All right, so I've got a 150-degree fitting to make this U-bend, and then it will go straight up to a straight fitting on the sump. So let's make up this line. Here it is, hose in place, right there, ready to go, snakes down. And then you'll see where I have a 90-degree elbow here that will go to this fitting. So I'll have a line that comes down from here to there. This line will go here to there. And then I'll have some heat shielding up to kind of protect these hoses in area. So that should come out nice. Cool. And by the way, as you've seen, this is an air to oil cooler. On the engine itself, there's actually another oil cooler on here. It's a water to oil cooler, and that's right here. So right in the V, underneath the head, is a water to oil cooler. So there's actually 2 oil coolers on this engine. And if you remember back in an early episode, originally there was a second water to oil cooler that was just too big and bulky and wouldn't fit at all in this engine bay. So the combination of a water to cool oil and then an air to oil, I should have plenty of oil cooling as well. So here we go, on to the next. All right, I have got the driver's side header out here on the bench. What I'm gonna do on this, I've got to weld up a couple of bungs. So this is an O2 sensor bung, pretty standard M18 thread that's gonna go on the side, as well as the exhaust gas temperature sensor bung. And in a previous episode I mentioned I had to actually make these. These are, I couldn't find any online or anywhere else, but these are M14 by 1.5 pitch threaded, and they're not a through hole. There's a ridge at the end where the EGT sensor bottoms out into. So it's somewhat different and unique. I just decided using my little mini lathe to make a pair of these, and they came out nice. Those are gonna go there. I actually have to trim these ends a little shorter. I'm gonna trim, you see the trim line here. It's important that I keep this line square. So what I did was I just 3D printed just a kind of a cylinder template that I could slide on here that's just snug so that I can make a completely perfectly square line around the tube. And so this will be my cut line. What I will be welding on the end is first half of the V-band clamp connectors. That will get welded right on the end there so that I can then do the flex end and the rest of the exhaust right here. Once that's in place and the bungs are welded in, then I will be taking these headers over to the powder coater where we'll get these headers coated up. So let's get to it. All right, header is back on the bench. What I'm gonna do first is install the exhaust gas temperature sensor bung. Here is the EGT sensor. This is off factory R8 and Huracan. You'll notice there's a little shoulder at the bottom of that it secures into the bung. So what I'm gonna do is screw this into the bung. So that goes through like that. And what I will do is, to make sure it's centered perfectly, I'll just lay this in there and then just put a couple of tacks on there, back this out, and then I'm gonna actually put a bolt in here. And the bolt is important to help dissipate heat. So there's gonna be a lot of heat because this bung is pretty thick compared to this. So I want the bolt to absorb a lot of the heat so it's not going into the thin metal. And then I will finish weld all the way around and then we'll be good to go. So let's get to welding this up. So I think I spotted an issue as I'm getting ready to weld up. This is the O2 sensor bung. Notice how tall the bung itself is and how little of the sensor is sticking out. And then when you compensate for the thickness of the exhaust header, there isn't just not a lot of sensor sticking into the hole. So I think what I'm gonna have to do is machine down about 5 millimeter off the top of this bung so that it's a little bit shallower so that the sensor sits deeper into the exhaust header. So I just checked the factory header, and sure enough, the flange that's on the header is only about the width of the head of a bolt. So the sensor, sure enough, does go deeper into the header on factory OEM factory headers. These are a little bit too tall. Fortunate for me, I have a little bench top lathe that I can chuck up and then just machine down about 5mm of this bung. So let's do it. All right, I got the exhaust headers, I think, finally finished. So welded on the O2 sensor bung, the EGT sensor bung, as well as I actually put together a flex section in addition to some V-band joints. So let's take a look at what I got here. Okay, so everything is in place. I just taped the V-band joint together because I don't have any V-band clamps. I gotta order some of those. But I put a small flex section in here, and then what I'll do is I'll route a 45-degree bend into an X pipe and through a couple of small catalytic converters and out the back. Came out pretty nice. Pretty happy with the welding there. Again, I don't weld too often, so usually the first bit of welding in a session is not too good, and then I get better as I go along through a welding session. Definitely striving for symmetry here. So you can see the position of the O2 sensor and EGT sensor is mirrored on the other side. So symmetry is the name of the game in my book. So anyway, I am getting ready to put that engine and transmission back in the engine bay here. I've got all the lines routed. Speaking of symmetry, you can see I've got here fuel line, vapor line from the purge tank, vapor tank. And then on the other side, I have a vacuum line as well as the coolant overflow from the front of the radiator. This, I think, is ready to go. I'm gonna fit I've got the AN oil feed line. I obviously got too much hose there, but once I get the engine in, I can fit that, cut that, and get that final line fitted. I'm waiting for few other AN fittings so that I can finish up the connection from the thermostat to the cooler, and then from the thermostat to the output, oil output of the engine. So we're getting there. So let's get this engine in the engine bay. Let's do it. All right, I'm getting ready to put this transmission in, and before I do, I figured I would weigh it. If you remember back many episodes ago, I weighed the engine, and now let's see how much this weighs. Ready? Here it comes. Any guesses? 305.5 pounds dry. That is a heavy transmission, but it's dual clutch, it shifts like lightning, so hopefully it's worth it. All right, let's keep it going. Let's get it in the car. Engine is in midair here, and I had forgotten, car's too high, chassis is too high. I cannot get the engine forward enough to clear the transmission. I can't push the transmission back anymore because it's interfering with the piston on the lift. So that arm is just too short. It's at its longest setting, but still it's too short. So the way to remedy is lower the chassis closer to the ground, so as that arm comes down a little more, it extends the engine out and all this interference won't occur. So anyway, I gotta pull this engine back and lower the chassis probably a foot, and then we'll try this again. But that looks interesting. A lot of time and effort and money hanging there in midair under a few chains. All right, well, let's get this chassis lowered so I can get the engine in place. Supply line from the sump is in, so you can see now why I needed to do kind of the loop there. Came out nice, clearance. I've actually got a kind of a C-clamp there just to hold it off the frame, make it nice and secure. Cool, that one's done. Let's keep going on this. All right, the engine and transmission is back in the car. And man, I I always forget how crammed and how tight the fit is on this thing, but what a package. Let's take a closer look. All right, so I have not bolted the transmission to the engine quite yet. So the transmission has to go forward about 1 inch. You can see in there, it's not quite bolted, but I just want to get the rest of the lines fitted because I will have to just raise the engine a little bit so I can get the headers off to send to the powder coaters. But I figure what I would do is start to get the exhaust fitted to figure out what I'm going to do. But it's in there. As you can see, there's not a lot of space. A couple of fingers there. And then down below, I'll show you what I'm dealing with the AN fittings and the oil lines. Coolant hoses will line up nicely down here. I will cut this elbow a little short and then do just an aluminum tube intermediate because I have to do a T-fitting for the heater hoses. So that will work out nice. Clearance between the header and the body is pretty good on the passenger side. I think what I will do though is just run some insulated heat shielding just along this ridge, just to keep that shielded from the heat. This side's a little bit closer. Certainly there's some variance in the header design. They're not perfectly identical, but you can see here my weld tab is a little close. I mean, clearly that will clear even if the engine twists a little bit. But I'm going to do the same over here. I'm just going to put some black insulating, the same stuff I used on the rear firewall. Just do a small strip of it there to protect fiberglass. And down here on this side, same thing. Coolant hose comes out of the engine down there. Kind of does a 180 and then we'll go back in. So again, I'll cut that one a little short. Do a small aluminum tube section with a small adapter so I can tee into it for the coolant, the heater hoses. That'll work. Let me go underneath and show you what I'm dealing with. A couple of my heater hoses here. You can see I still got to secure some of these lines. But there's plenty of lines under here. I'm trying to keep them all kind of consolidated to this part underneath the engine bay, out of the way, out of heat, so forth. And then I'll be doing a skid plate, if you will, to cover the underneath of this engine bay as a final measure. That'll protect the ECU, both ECUs at the other end, which I've got both plugged in over there, and also the rest of these hoses and lines and so forth. So not a lot of space, but it is going to work. So let's keep going. Let's get after it.